Mission 1. The Drop. It's another routine day like any other on this mission when it happens. The latest diplomatic summit has been extended again as negotiations remain at an impasse, and Ambassador Banerjee has requested that Captain Ferris join them down on the planet to give a speech or two and meet with some of the delegates in the hopes that a new face and fresh perspective might help shift some attitudes. She's been down there for several days now, and the XO, First Lieutenant Kim, has command. This routine is suddenly appended as a shipwide alarm interrupts whatever the PCs are in the middle of, and Rio, the shipboard NHP, issues a general announcement. All hands to action stations. I repeat, all hands to action stations. This is not a drill. Set condition 1 Jágr, ready away ships for debarkation. All marine and pilot elements, report to your assigned flight decks for briefing and assignment. The relaxed state aboard the ship dissolves in an instant as everyone stops whatever they're doing and hurries to their stations. In the case of the PCs, this is one of the Rio Grande's flight decks. Condition 1 Jágr, they know from their academy courses, is the call for landing craft to prepare for deployment. Whatever's happening, it isn't coming from space, it's on the planet below. The hangar deck is no less busy, with deckhands hurriedly prepping ships and chassis as Marines don armor and move double time into formation. Speakers crackle and display screens light up with the face of First Lieutenant Kim looking even more serious than usual as he begins to address the assembled troops on the deck. As of 1400 hours, we are on combat alert. Several hours ago, we received a transmission from Ambassador Banerjee that civil defense warnings were being sounded across Nova Alizia. Then all communications with the surface went dark, and we've been unable to raise the ambassador, the captain, or anyone within the local government. Based on orbital flyover imagery gathered by Rio, it appears that Nova Alizia is under attack by Western sovereignty forces, with significant deployment of mechanized chassis forces throughout the city. He waits for a moment to let that news sink in before continuing. Chrysidium is not officially a member of Union at this point. Militarily, we aren't authorized to intervene on behalf of the LSA in this conflict, but simply leaving Captain Ferris and Ambassador Banerjee to ride this out on their own is not an option. As such, after conferring with the other officers aboard this ship, it's been decided that we will be conducting a rescue operation with the primary objective of first locating, then securing the ambassador and the captain, and safely escorting them to an extraction point. Rules of engagement for this operation are that you are not to engage unless fired upon. Our main priority here is to bring our people home. Briefing. The mission, as outlined, seems straightforward enough. Mechs and Marines from the Rio Grande will deploy near a staging area location in Nova Alizia's industrial district designated Forward Operating Base Sabre. Once assembled, they'll resupply if necessary and then move out toward the central district where the diplomatic talks were taking place, heading for the last known location of the captain and ambassador. After the VIPs have been secured, they'll be escorted back through a defensive perimeter established by a second wave of Union forces to a safe location away from the fighting and extracted by shuttle back to the Rio Grande. The PCs have been selected as part of the initial landing, which means they're headed down to Chrysidium along with the rest of the first wave. Because communications with the surface seem to be cut off, one person in each mech squad is being assigned an Omnihook, Lancer, page 114, to maintain Omninet comms with the Rio Grande. This specialized piece of equipment is finicky, and tuning it requires a high level of technical skill, but it will allow the PCs to send and receive reports to and from the ship if necessary. The PCs should take care of any last-minute preparations or adjustments they wish to make to their mech loadouts, and then it's time for them to board their dropship. Mission objectives: land at Forward Operating Base Sabre and await further orders. GM note: this will immediately be changed to make your way through Nova Alizia to reach FOB Sabre following the events of Combat 1. It's not the fall that kills you. Page 16. Mission parameters: unknown at this time. Hostile forces are confirmed to be operating within Nova Alizia, so anticipate enemy contact. You are cleared to engage if fired upon. Stakes: failure to rendezvous at FOB Sabre in a timely fashion will result in delays, setting the operation's timetable back and potentially narrowing the window of opportunity to rescue Captain Ferris and Ambassador Banerjee. GM note: This will be changed to failure to clear an approach corridor to FOB Sabre through sovereignty defenses will result in additional casualties and delays for second-wave reinforcements arriving from the Rio Grande during the events of Beat, Broken SKY page 21. Reward: once the players arrive at FOB Sabre, the situation on the ground will be evaluated and field upgrades distributed accordingly, bringing the PCs up to LL1. At his discretion, First Lieutenant Kim may also authorize the distribution of advanced weapons and systems as exotic gear. Reserves: the PCs don't have the opportunity to bring any reserves into play at the moment. You are the cavalry. Some players may ask that if Union forces have a ship in orbit, whether they can expect to be provided with orbital fire support, or perhaps with air support from its fighters and bombers. For several reasons, this isn't an option. Firstly, like most naval carriers, the Rio Grande is minimally armed. While outfitted with an array of point defense cannons capable of intercepting smaller vessels and inbound munitions, the majority of its force projection lies with its wings of strike craft rather than weapons capable of providing fire support from orbit. Additionally, the area of operation for this mission is a densely populated urban environment, and Union's rules of engagement regarding orbital bombardment are held to strict standards. Even precision orbit-to-surface strikes are frequently high-splash, with a corresponding high risk of collateral damage. Lastly, naval strike craft aren't typically designed to be used in atmosphere. While some examples of transatmospheric aerospace fighters and bombers do exist, the Rio Grande's complement are limited to exoatmospheric operations only. Once the PCs deploy onto Crisidium, they'll be on their own. Standard orbit-to-surface deployment protocols would be to ferry troops down to the surface in landing craft at designated operating bases for assignment and, in the case of pilots, chassis printing as required. At least that's how it's supposed to happen, but right now the area of operation is too hot to risk a conventional landing and the clock is ticking fast. With the situation on the ground growing more critical by the hour, the XO has decided that a combat-ready strike force of mechanized chassis and marines will be fast deployed via dropships to secure the area, locate the captain and the ambassador, and extract for pickup. Your squad has been selected to be a part of this spear tip. Your mechs are prepped and loaded aboard the dropship, ready for deployment. Through your chassis camera feeds, strapped securely into the cockpit, you watch as the hatches slide closed around you and the hangar airlocks open for launch. From up here, Crisidium looks peaceful, a shimmering jewel hanging in space. 10 seconds to drop. You take a breath as the pilot counts down. Inhale. Exhale. Then your stomach lurches as the clamps disengage and the dropship's thrusters kick into full burn. The ride is smooth at first, atmospheric insertion nominal, no anti-orbital defenses rising to greet you. It's all very textbook, straight out of the simulators. But the closer you get to the drop zone, the hotter things become, the pilots having to adjust their course to avoid greater concentrations of incoming fire. The ship jukes hard to narrowly avoid another incoming missile, and for a moment you think you're in the clear, then a blinding beam of light suddenly lashes up from somewhere down below and an explosion rips through the hull. Shit. Starboard engines blown, stabilizers aren't responding. Mayday, mayday, this is Kingfisher 2-2. We are going down, repeat, we are going. The crash is sudden and violent, slamming you around inside the cockpit of your chassis, but your cockpit is also what saves you as the dropship hits the ground hard with the sound of screeching metal. What's left of the dropship finally skids to a halt, and just as suddenly it's all over, leaving you reeling and bruised. Your cockpit readouts blare with collision alarms and your ears are ringing, but you're all still alive and your mech is still in one piece. With nothing but static on all frequencies, you can assume that help isn't coming. For now, you're on your own. Time to get to work, pilot. The mission begins with the PC's dropship being shot down, forcing them to crash land. They find themselves in Kermani Plaza, far off course from their intended drop zone. With intense comms jamming in full effect and the city under siege, the PCs are cut off from the main unit and unable to call for assistance. This doesn't mean they're helpless, though. They've all survived the crash unharmed save for some superficial injuries, and their mechs are fully intact and operational. The dropship pilots weren't as lucky, unfortunately, and were killed on impact. The dropship itself has also been destroyed, none of its systems are operational, and nothing useful can be salvaged from the wreckage. Sounds of gunfire and explosions can periodically be heard in the distance. Give the PCs a few moments to get their bearings and take everything in. They may want to collect dog tags from the deceased pilots, take stock of their surroundings, and begin to formulate a plan of action. Though their landing didn't go as planned, they still have a mission to pursue. Right now their first order of business is finding a way to link up with the main unit in this sector. According to their briefings and their onboard maps, there should be a forward operating base, FOB Sabre, within the area, though it's going to require moving through the city on foot in order to reach it now. Before the PCs can set out, a burst of gunfire sails narrowly overhead, interrupting them. Enemy forces have been sent to investigate the crash, and several squads of mechs are now closing in on all sides. The PCs will have to hold their ground and drive off the enemy before they can proceed any further. Their first objective is to survive. Pre-combat preparations. Some astute players may anticipate that a fight is imminent and wish to preemptively fortify the area using systems like mines or turrets. By default, systems and abilities can't be placed or switched on before combat begins, as the actions required to deploy or activate them are considered part of the cost of utilizing them. If you wish to allow players to begin a fight with a certain number of pre-deployed or activated systems, this can be handled either as special reserves, Lancer, page 52, as a reward for succeeding at various narrative challenges between combat encounters, or as part of a special encounter where the players are given the chance to prepare the battlefield in advance. Combat 1. It's not the fall that kills you. Details. The PCs begin in the player deployment zone/objective zone, PDZ/ounce, and can place their mechs however they like. This area is fortified with hard cover provided by the wreckage of the dropship and nearby rubble. The initial group of enemy forces is placed in one of the two enemy deployment zones, EDZs, along the right side of the map, while the second group is held in reserve as reinforcements. The objective for the PCs is to securely hold the PDZ ounce for 6 rounds. They can also succeed by destroying all enemy forces. If they fail, they will still be able to continue on with the rest of the mission, but it will force them to hastily fall back to avoid being overrun. As this is an introductory fight, it's a good opportunity to remind less experienced or familiar Lancer players about important basic rules such as cover, the scan action, and their mech traits. One example is the GMS Everest's initiative trait, which allows them to take a quick action of their choice as a free action one scene. This can allow them to skirmish or invade an additional time, to boost if they need more movement, to deploy or use a system, and so on. Using initiative doesn't cost anything, so remind the players that they may as well use it when they see a good opening. Overcharge is another source of additional actions, and at this point in the mission the heat cost for doing so is very low, though it will increase the more the players push their mechs beyond their limits. Each frame also has a powerful core system, a special ability that, in most cases, can only be used once per mission. The Everest, for example, has a power UP ability that increases its overall effectiveness for the duration of an entire combat scene, giving it enhanced accuracy on all attacks, checks, and saves, and a free boost on each of its turns. Players can choose when to use core systems and may wish to save them for later. You may want to remind them that this won't be the only fight they'll be getting into during this mission, if they aren't aware. In combat, enemy assault units will attempt to stick close to cover and their Bastion ally, while the Hive will use drone barrage and razor swarms to disrupt the PCs, creating zones that protect its allies and damage enemies. Rank discipline also gives the assaults additional accuracy on attacks, checks, and saves while adjacent to allied mechs, and the Hive becomes even more dangerous up close with the use of Electro-Nanite Cloud. The support does no damage itself, though it can ram and grapple, but it can keep the HP of its allies topped up with restock drones and latch drones to make them harder to kill. Keeping a support close by an assault is also a good way to give the former the benefit of rank discipline alongside its nano repair cloud trait. The ultimate goal of the NPCs is to occupy the PDZ/ounce, so they won't simply remain on the outside shooting in, but neither will they recklessly charge without regard for cover, especially if the PCs have powerful ranged weapons at their disposal. Reinforcements. Enemy reinforcements can be brought in at the start of any round, but you may wish to wait until the start of the second round to give the players a chance to adjust to things. You can bring in up to 2 NPCs at a time anywhere in the ingress zones, that run most of the way around the map, or from the initial EDZs. This allows reinforcements to enter the fight from flanking angles, and you can choose which reinforcements to bring in based on the situation and the PC's tactics. GM tips. The Bombard is an artillery unit that does more damage against clustered targets. While it's unlikely to want to advance into the PDZ ounce itself, it can provide support fire for its allies from a distance. Be advised, though, that Bombard attacks don't distinguish between friend and foe. The Priest, on the other hand, has powerful defensive capabilities that can be used to enhance and protect allies, though doing so requires it to remain close by. This protection can be used to guard against the PC's attacks, but can also protect closer ranged allies from the Bombard's friendly fire if necessary. Ronin are fast, hard-hitting melee units that will seek to close the gap quickly, putting additional pressure on the players. Ronin can prove especially hard to deal with using ranged weapons, as their rebound ability both gives them resistance to ranged attacks and also sends damage back the way it came. The Piwero is a dangerous, resilient NPC that can protect allies with its firebreak shield and deal burn damage over a wide area, synergizing with the burn dealt by the Hive. Explosive Jets allows it to move rapidly, keeping pace with faster units, but its recharge limit means you won't always be able to count on having access to it. Look for good opportunities to use recharge abilities while they're available, and have a plan for when they aren't. Grunts present players with a unique threat that hits as hard as a normal enemy, but dies to a single point of damage or heat, including from reliable weapons like the GMS assault rifle. As easy as they are to kill, grunts left unchecked can do significant damage. Spacing them close together also makes them more vulnerable to area of effect weapons such as mortars, howitzers, and RPGs. As such, consideration should be given to how you deploy them, as their proximity to one another can make them easier or harder to handle depending on what the players are equipped with and how challenging you want to make the fight. Outcome: PC victory. If the PCs successfully hold their position for 6 rounds, any remaining hostiles are forced to retreat. Among the wreckage, the PCs find an intact target designator that one of the enemy mechs was carrying. This designator can be patched into one of their mechs and used to signal for an artillery strike using the enemy's own guns, though it will only work once before they figure out that their own weapons have been turned against them. Treat this as a bombardment reserve, Lancer, page 52. PC defeat. If the PCs fail, they are forced to abandon their position under constant artillery fire. Each player must roll a DSIX. On 1-3, they're hit by enemy fire while retreating and must either take 1 structure damage, this does not cause a structure damage check, or destroy all weapons on 1 mount of their choice. On 4+, they make it out unscathed. VSAF C-60 Caballeros, Assault NPC. The standard frontline mechanized chassis in service with the Western Sovereignty Armed Forces, the C-60 Caballeros, commonly referred to as Roundheads by LSA troopers, is a rugged and reliable design, if somewhat top-heavy, and is often used to spearhead assaults and storm entrenched positions, clearing the way for additional forces to follow up. Its reinforced frame is outfitted with panels of ablative armor that can be angled to absorb and deflect incoming fire, though doing so necessitates frequent replacement and maintain ANT's downtime. Standard loadout for Caballeros pilots is based around a heavy-caliber ballistic automatic rifle and a composite alloy close combat blade, with frame and weapon integrated mounting points for additional armaments based on mission profile. Beat 1. On the move in a military manner. With their first battle behind them, the PCs have a chance to catch their breath as they make their way through the city. During a mission, the time between combat scenes allows pilots to rest, Lancer, page 82, repairing damage and preparing for the next engagement. It can also be an opportunity for the GM to provide characters with narrative challenges. These challenges can influence future scenes, provide PCs with additional intelligence or resources, and flesh out the scope and stakes of missions beyond simply combat. Nova Alizia is a modern city on par with any core world metropolis. Tall, gleaming buildings rise over precisely ordered streets and thoroughfares, all built in a grandiose, somewhat outsized architectural style that hints at the planet's SETCOM history. Under better circumstances the city might be beautiful, but now a grimy haze of dust and smoke hangs in the air. Empty cars line the roads, signs of a hasty evacuation, while civil defense warnings urging people to take shelter loop endlessly across electronic advertisement screens interspersed with automated advertisements. This close to the thick of the fighting, more and more buildings have been damaged in the crossfire, and broken glass and debris crunch beneath the feet of the PC's mechs as they traverse the environment. As with all urban combat, the dissonance between a place where people live and work and the violating encroachment of weapons of war makes for a tense and unsettling atmosphere. The jamming that the PCs have been experiencing since their landing remains a constant. Any attempts to raise comms with anyone beyond than their own immediate area are drowned by static, and even long-range sensors are patchy and full of ghosts. Omninet signals aren't affected by the jamming, however, and the PCs can still communicate with the Rio Grande via the Omnihook that they were assigned. As they make their way through the downtown area, the PCs round a corner and find a broken-down bus stalled out, with several soldiers hastily attempting to repair the engine. They drop their tools and throw their hands in the air before the PCs have a chance to act, interposing themselves between the mechs and the bus. Frightened passengers look back at the players through the windows and duck down with cries of alarm. "Whoa, whoa, whoa, don't shoot. Don't shoot, please. There are civilians on board." Based on their uniforms and markings, the PCs can easily identify the soldiers as belonging to the LSA, not the sovereignty. Once the PCs make it clear that they're Union pilots sent from the Rio Grande, the soldiers tell them that they were sent out as part of a larger convoy to escort civilians to defense shelters when they were ambushed and cut off from the others. They've been trying to make their way to a nearby shelter on their own, but it's been slow going as they skirt around the fighting, and now the bus has broken down. They need help to escort their passengers to safety. Escorting the civilians to safety can be handled one of two ways, either narratively as an extended skill challenge, Lancer, page 47, or as a combat. A skill challenge allows players to bring their pilot's relevant triggers into play along with their mech skills, and is suitable if your group wants to take a more narrative approach to problem solving. Handling it as a skill challenge is also appropriate if you feel that 3 combat scenes in this mission are perhaps too many, such as if you're concerned about time or if the PCs took heavy damage in the previous battle. Missions in Lancer can vary in length from 2-4 combat scenes depending on how challenging the GM wishes to make things and how resourceful the players are. If you choose to escorting the civilians as an extended skill challenge, it has 3 stages. 1. Repair the bus. 2. Scout a safe route ahead. 3. Provide an escort. The players will need to succeed in at least 2 of these stages. Refer to the PC victory and PC defeat results for Combat 2, look both ways, page 20, for the consequences of either outcome. If you wish to handle this as a tactical combat encounter instead, then use the following combat. Combat 2. Look both ways. Details. The PCs begin in the Player Deployment Zone, PDZ, on the left side of the map, along with the mission's objective, the bus. Enemy forces are placed in their own Enemy Deployment Zone, EDZ, situated between the players and the Extraction Zone, EZ, at the other end of the map. The battlefield is strewn with pieces of cover from rubble and overturned vehicles, and the enemy forces have also created an improvised firing position within their deployment zone reinforced with cover and extruded polymer fortifications from a combat chassis with mobile printing capabilities. The goal of this encounter is to escort the bus to the EZ and safely extract with it by the end of the 8th round. Failing to accomplish this will mean that the bus cannot safely reach the emergency shelters, and the PCs will be forced to leave it behind to continue on with their mission. The bus only moves when a character who started their turn adjacent to it makes their standard move, at which point it moves along with them. As such, it's possible for PCs to daisy-chain the bus forward by moving it so it ends up next to another PC who hasn't taken their turn yet. This allows them to cover ground quickly, but if the bus ever ends up adjacent to characters from 2 opposing sides, then it stops moving and can't move again until only characters from one side are next to it. The escort sitrep is about teamwork, not just one PC being assigned to move the objective, and you may wish to point this out if it seems like the PCs are struggling to make much headway. It's also important to note that as this objective is size 2, it can move through, but not stop in the spaces occupied by obstructions that are smaller than itself, including other characters. Reinforcements. There are 4 ingress zones, placed around the map from which enemy reinforcements can enter. At the start of any round, you can deploy 1 standard NPC or up to 4 grunts from any IZ, though the same zone cannot be used twice in a row. These reinforcements can be used to flank the PCs, threatening them from positions against which they aren't as protected and diverting their attention from other NPCs or the bus. GM tips. The escort sitrep relies on the PCs being able to move along with the objective, and the enemy forces arrayed against them in this combat are designed to make it more difficult to advance forward. In combat, the archer will start by staying close to its dug in firing position and targeting PCs with suppress and hail of fire, but as they get closer it will fall back to new cover positions, including those created by the barricade. Not only can the barricade create additional areas of cover, but its graviton lance will slow PCs, and drag down makes even standard movement a painful choice. The engineer is a striker that deploys turrets that can quickly grow to be an overwhelming force all on their own if left uncontested. Up to 6 turrets can be placed at a time, but they have to be placed adjacent to the engineer, which restricts their deployment at least until it can use mobile turrets to reposition them. The Sentinel is a short-range defender role NPC that threatens with Overwatch and whose impaler can immobilize any PCs that don't respect it. You should look to position the Sentinel in such a way that players who choose to simply run past it risk triggering Overwatch, which it can use multiple times in a round thanks to Eye of Midnight. Cataphracts are mobile strikers that can move through enemy spaces without being forced to stop, allowing them to reach the backlines quickly. They can also drag PCs away from the bus using abilities like Impale and Electrified Lasso, making it harder for them to regroup. The Cedar is an area controller that places mines down on the battlefield before either moving enemies onto them using its Grave Grenade Launcher or Grave Spikes or by having allies like the Cataphracts do so. Allies won't trigger a Cedar's mines just by walking over them, but they can be caught in the blast when they detonate, so be mindful of that. You may wish to remind players that blast weapons, as well as those with arcing such as the GMS mortar, can be used to attack enemies behind cover since you check for cover and line of sight from the center of the blast itself. Additionally, some PCs may have abilities like Jackhammer, from the Siege Specialist talent, that allow them to easily destroy chunks of cover, which can make it easier to deal with dug-in enemies. Things like the Pattern a Jericho deployable cover system or Pattern a smoke charges can also be used to create cover where there is none, allowing PCs to advance more safely. Similarly, the ability of the invade option fragment signal to impair enemies can hinder NPCs that rely upon threatening the PCs with additional attacks, like the Archer and the Sentinel. If you want to add an additional environmental hazard to this fight, you can include a number of overturned vehicles that can act as improvised explosives if shot, marked on the map as the vehicles that are on fire. Each one is a size 1-2 object with evasion 5 and defense 5 that explodes with a burst 1 area upon taking any damage or heat. All characters within the affected area must succeed on an agility save or take 2d6 explosive damage. On a success, they take half damage. Both PCs and NPCs can take advantage of these improvised weapons. Remember that the NPCs will not willingly damage the bus. Their goal is to stop the PCs from extracting it, though incidental damage may occur due to area effect weapons and systems. Likewise, if the players are about to do something that could potentially damage the bus, you should remind them that they're meant to be protecting it and ask if they're sure they wish to go through with it. Destruction of the bus will result in there being no victor. Outcome: PC victory. The PCs clear a safe path for the bus and escort it through the worst of the fighting. The grateful passengers thank the PCs for their help, and from here the soldiers will be able to make their way to a nearby shelter without any further difficulties. Before they part ways, one of the soldiers gives the PCs the lay of the land, informing them of some useful side routes they can make use of on their way to reach FOB Sabre. This will open up an additional player deployment zone in the next battle, Combat 3, Downpour. One of the passengers, a young girl, shyly gives one of the PCs a well-loved stuffed rabbit for luck. Whether they believe in such things or not, this lucky charm acts as a single-use version of the custom paint job system, Lancer, page 120, that, once triggered, is permanently expended. If the PC also has an actual custom paint job, then the charm can instead be expended to automatically set the result of the custom paint job roll to 6. PC defeat. If the PCs don't extract the bus in time, the enemy forces prove too intractable to punch a hole through. The bus's driver, in a panic, pulls the vehicle into a hard turn down a side alley to escape the fighting. Moments later, an explosion causes part of one of the buildings to collapse, blocking the alleyway behind it. Their ultimate fate will have to remain unknown for now, as the PCs are forced to fall back towards their own objective and leaving this part of the city in enemy hands. Beat 2. Broken Sky. After another opportunity to rest, the PCs continue their journey as it begins to rain throughout the city. Though they've had to fight to get this far, they're now finally within reach of the intended initial drop point, and as they get closer they can see why this mission has been more difficult than expected. Ahead of them is a train depot, through which is the most direct route to FOB Sabre, and perched aboard a train car is a mechanized chassis outfitted with missile launchers. Another Union dropship flies overhead, part of a new wave dispatched from the Rio Grande. They've made it farther into the city by air than the first wave did, but with no way to punch through the comms jamming and not enough time for an Omnihook relayed message to reach them, the PCs can only watch as the mech takes position, tracks the dropship, and launches a salvo of missiles at it. The pilots attempt to evade, but like their own dropship it takes fire and begins to fall. Moments later, the PCs hear the crash and a plume of smoke begins to rise in the distance. Sovereignty forces have deployed mobile missile batteries all throughout the city along with their other forces, and those units are preventing any dropships from making effective landings within the area of operations. This particular battery is positioned in such a way that it's locking down the approach corridor to FOB Sabre, which means that as long as it remains active it won't be possible to touch down near the base without serious danger. There are other mechs deployed near the missile battery as well, arrayed in defensive positions throughout the depot. If the PCs are going to reach FOB Sabre and prevent more of their reinforcements from being shot down, they'll need to clear the area first. Combat 3. Downpour. The primary objective of the PCs in this combat is to eliminate the Rainmaker NPC and the rest of the enemy units stationed here. While simply destroying the Rainmaker on its own won't mean instant victory, its destruction will ensure that even if the PCs are defeated or forced to retreat they will have neutralized the anti-air defenses within this area, allowing further reinforcements to safely land. There are 2 player deployment zones, PDZs, for this combat. PDZ-A is always available for the PCs to deploy in at the start of the combat. If the PCs successfully assisted the bus during the previous beat 1, on the move in a military manner, they will know about a flanking route they can exploit without alerting the enemy in advance. In this case, one PC can deploy to PDZ-B if they wish, giving them a direct sightline to the Rainmaker. Aside from the Rainmaker, which has its own dedicated deployment zone, you are free to deploy the NPCs however you wish as long as they are 10 spaces or more away from the PDZs. This is a chance to experiment with NPC deployment and positioning. Keep in mind the strengths and weaknesses of the NPCs comprising the enemy force here and how you can best utilize them to challenge the PCs, as well as being mindful of cover and line of sight, and how you can use those to your advantage. GM tips. The Rainmaker itself has taken up position behind several train cars big enough to block line of sight. Each train car is 3 spaces high, and each size 1 section of train car has 5 evasion and 10 HP if anyone tries to blow holes in them to create sightlines, though this might take some time depending on the weapons used. The Rainmaker's missile pods have arcing, which means it can be used to attack without needing line of sight, nor does it need line of sight to use its Hades missiles. Furthermore, targeting PCs with Lock-On gives its missile pods Seeking, Smart, and AP, which means it not only ignores line of sight but also all cover penalties. Keep in mind that this ability even works if the Rainmaker consumes the Lock-On for additional accuracy, as Lock-On is only removed from the target after the attack is fully resolved. Because of this, the Rainmaker can afford to remain out of sight behind the train cars and still attack the PCs, especially if other NPCs apply Lock-On to them either by taking the quick tech action to do so or by using things like the Hive Seeker Cloud. However, the Rainmaker's javelin rockets do require line of sight to their destination. These rockets can deny areas on the map, forming a potent combination together with the missile pod's ability to knock targets back into them, so the Rainmaker has a choice. It can either seek to remain as safe as possible, or it can try to maneuver itself to where it has line of sight, such as the gap between the train cars, to launch javelin rockets and set up a combo attack, but risk being attacked in turn. The PCs can also try to use indirect fire with arcing weapons to hit the Rainmaker from behind its cover, or they can attempt to flank it by moving around and past the train cars, but the Hive and Sentinel will do everything they can to prevent this as long as possible. They can do this by cutting off the PC's movement through a combination of positioning, the Sentinel's Overwatch attacks enhanced by Punisher ammunition, forced movement with drone barrage, and deploying Razor swarms. There is another approach that the PCs could take. Located within the depot is a turntable control panel that can be used to rotate the turntable upon which one of the train cars rests, shifting the train car and anything else on it by 90 degrees. This can open up clearer sight lines and potentially even expose the Rainmaker to unobstructed direct fire if it happens to be standing on the turntable when it rotates. An adjacent mech with the manipulator's system or a dismounted pilot on foot can use the controls as a quick action with no check required. Other PCs must succeed on an agility check as a full action while adjacent to the terminal in order to make use of the human-sized controls with their mecha's hands. Additionally, once during the combat, a PC within the marked crane control zone can interface with the nearby automated cargo and maintenance crane as a quick action. This can be done either by a dismounted pilot or from within a mech. Interfacing with the crane allows them to use it to lift one of the specially designated train cars and remove it from the map entirely. While this won't expose the Rainmaker, it can open up the map and make it easier for players to maneuver around things like Razor swarms and javelin rockets that they might otherwise be funneled into. This combat introduces several NPC templates that make NPCs tougher and grant additional capabilities beyond what they normally have access to. Both the Rainmaker and the Sentinel have templates that give them additional structure and stress, making them harder to kill, and the Rainmaker's additional lightning reflexes trait gives the comparatively fragile artillery unit an additional layer of protection against heavy and super heavy weapons. As an elite NPC, the Sentinel gains no new abilities but takes 2 separate turns each round instead of 1, making it a significantly more dangerous opponent. Compensating for its short range, rapid response allows it to quickly reposition itself once per round in order to more effectively threaten anyone trying to move past it or soften it up from a distance. If the Commander template comes into play, don't forget to make use of its abilities. In addition to granting the Sentinel even more structure and stress, the Voice of Authority feature allows it to give its allies rerolls on attacks, while Quick March gives enemy forces even more options for repositioning, but only with line of sight. Remember, this combat also introduces the invisible and hidden conditions. The Spectre's tactical cloak makes it permanently invisible, the benefits of which apply against all attacks ranged, melee, and tech and can provide considerable protection to even fragile characters. However, this only applies to attacks, which means that PC actions that force saves, such as Pattern B hex charges, still work without penalty. Reliable weapons also continue to deal damage when they miss invisible targets, meaning weapons like the GMS assault rifle or GMS pistol can steadily add up as well. Characters that are hidden, which requires sufficient cover or the invisible condition, cannot be targeted directly, although they can hit by attacks and affected by systems which affect an area such as mortars and grenades. The Spectre's weakness analyzer gives its monowire sword additional accuracy and critical damage when the Spectre is hidden, making it even more of a danger if not dealt with promptly. Spectres also gain additional damage when preying on isolated targets, which the Rainmaker or Hive can help set up through forced movement. You may wish to remind the players of the scan action if they seem to be struggling with the unfamiliar abilities of these template-enhanced NPCs. Remember that NPC classes and templates are public knowledge, available to players on request, but details of specific weapons, systems, and traits can be kept hidden unless scanned for. Outcome: PC victory. If the PCs eliminate all enemies, they will have neutralized the missile battery and punched a hole through the enemy's anti-air defenses. Additional reinforcements arriving through this corridor will be able to land without risk of being shot down, and the way is also clear to proceed directly to FOB Sabre. If the PCs defeat every enemy by the end of the 5th round, they earn 1 additional exotic gear selection. Refer to Downtime, FOB Sabre, page 25, for details. PC defeat. If the PCs are unsuccessful or are forced to retreat without destroying the Rainmaker, enemy anti-air coverage remains unabated. They can still make their way to FOB Sabre by a longer and less direct route. Reinforcements are forced to break off their approach and touch down elsewhere or risk being shot down. Further casualties are incurred, and it's a weary and wounded force that wins its way toward the base late into the night under the drumbeat of constant rain. VSAF C-47 Typhooners, Rainmaker NPC. The C-47 Typhooners mobile missile platform is a cornerstone of Western Seas and Hold and Area Denial doctrines, presenting a broad portfolio of threat response options. Built with a low profile for additional stability and designed for traversal across uneven terrain, the Typhooners multi-role guided missile batteries can be equipped for a variety of tasks including anti-air coverage, direct and indirect fire support, and strategic counter-battery missions. Though versatile, the Typhooners' slow overland speed and lack of armor render it vulnerable to direct assault in the absence of accompanying escort units. Downtime, FOB Sabre. The sun is setting by the time you finally reach the coordinates on your TAC map, within Nove Alizia's industrial district. The sprawling complex is abuzz with activity, people moving pallets of supplies from one area to another, squads of soldiers jogging by on their way to rally points or returning from patrols, industrial cargo loaders trundling along with prefabricated fortification components to shore up perimeter defenses. As soon as you get within shooting distance, your systems are bombarded with automated identification queries, and just as quickly your IFF codes are transmitted and authenticated. A dozen targeting warnings vanish off your sensors as the defenses surrounding the base stand down, and for the first time since you landed on Cressidium you feel like you can relax, if only for a moment. Through your screens you see Staff Sergeant Garcia waving you over. "I see you hotshots took the scenic route, but it's good to see you all the same. We've still got units scattered all over the city, it's a real hell of a mess. For right now, follow Vonna," he says, gesturing to the well-built woman standing nearby. "She'll show you to the repair bay and get your chassis squared away, and then after that we'll get some food in you. Welcome to FOB Sabre." Forward Operating Base Sabre isn't an official military base in the strictest sense. Instead, the Amanta Motors Automotive Factory has been hastily put into service as an impromptu FOB for forces in this part of the city to rally around, acting as a crucial staging and resupply point for the city's defenders and scattered Union forces. In addition to the factory's size and relative defensibility, there's another crucial reason why it was chosen as an operating base. During the earlier negotiations, Ambassador Banerjee had a single GMS Schedule 1 printer delivered down to Nove Alizia and brought to the factory to showcase its capabilities to the delegates in attendance, demonstrating the advances Union was offering as a benefit of membership. As a result, this is currently the only Schedule tier printer on the entire planet. Once the invasion began, both Unions and the factory's engineers have had the printer running hot, feeding it raw material and printing out additional fortifications to supplement the factory's defenses as well as spare mech parts, weapons, and ammunition. While there are typically limits on the amount that can be printed at any one time, Union technicians have been pushing it beyond its standard output thresholds at the risk of drastically shortening its lifespan. These are desperate circumstances and they call for desperate measures. The factory's chief engineer, Vonna Mayhew, was here when the attack began and elected to stay behind to help rather than evacuate to a shelter, and she's currently overseeing chassis repairs and rearmament with a mix of military and civilian engineers. In addition to performing a full repair, each PC levels up to L loan. This grants various benefits, including the opportunity to purchase a license rank of their choice, Lancer, page 31. The printer's Omninet connection with the Rio Grande remains unaffected by the jamming, and Rio informs the players that First Lieutenant Kim has authorized and prioritized additional loadout permissions for them, which can be printed and equipped to their mechs as they undergo repair and refit. This is the first opportunity that players will have to begin customizing their mechs with non-GMS equipment, a major part of character advancement in Lancer. Reaching LL1 also grants PCs with a new talent rank, +1 to a mech skill point of their choice, +2 to an existing pilot trigger or a new trigger at +2, and their first point of grit, +1. Grit is added to a mecha's HP, SP, save target, and attack rolls, making it a very important stat in both combat and mech construction. At this point, players still won't have access to frames from any manufacturers other than GMS, as those other only become available when taking the second rank of a mecha's license, e.g. a rank 2 license in the IPSN Blackbeard, but between a new license rank, new talents, and additional mech skill points, the players should be well on their way to personalizing their mechs to suit their own desired playstyles. At any point during a full repair, players are able to completely overhaul their mechs however they like, swapping out weapons, systems, and frames for any other options they have access to in any combination. Exotic gear. In this particular case, the players don't just level up, they also gain access to several pieces of exotic gear, Advanced Systems First Lieutenant Kim has authorized for their use during this mission. Weapons and systems with the exotic gear tag represent tech that exists outside the traditional licensing system and can be awarded for completing various missions and objectives. All examples of exotic gear in this book are brand new systems, but you can also reward characters with existing weapons and systems they don't already have access to by applying this tag. For example, if a character wants to take shock knives from the SSC Metalmark but doesn't have the licenses to use them, you can offer them that reward as exotic gear instead. While exotic gear is a great reward for running missions, giving it out freely can rapidly increase PC's power levels as it gives them wider access to gear or weapons than they would usually have at their current LL. Looking around. The PCs now also have an opportunity to explore FOB Saber, talk to some of the characters here, or among themselves, and participate in one downtime action each. Lancer, page 53-55. Downtime actions are ways for PCs to begin long-term projects and acquire reserve special supplies and advantages that can be utilized during the upcoming mission. Even in an ad hoc military base in the middle of an active war zone, there's always a way for creative and determined pilots to get a damn drink. If the players successfully destroyed the Rainmaker during Combat 3, Downpour, the mood at the base is optimistic. Further Union forces arrive throughout the evening, able to land in relative safety thanks to the actions of the PCs. If they weren't able to neutralize the missile battery, the mood is much more somber. Reinforcements arrive more slowly and with more casualties, and the base's medics work tirelessly through the night tending to the wounded. Either way, the sounds of combat continue to be heard across the city, from the staccato report of gunfire to the occasional thunderclap of explosions in the distance. During this downtime period, the PCs can also explore FOB Saber and converse with NPCs if they wish. You can have each PC roll on the table below to find out what sorts of things they encounter while attending to their own business, or you can choose results off the table if you feel particular encounters would be appropriate. FOB Saber encounters. 1 or 2, I need 2 units ONEG. And you, grab that pad and put pressure on that wound. Either because you came across it while exploring or because you were taken there for injuries of your own, you find yourself in the base's makeshift triage station just as a wounded soldier is hurriedly brought in. They're bleeding badly and medics are short in supply, so you're briefly drafted as an additional pair of hands applying pressure to the wound, lifting and turning them when told to, and fetching supplies as needed. Your hands and your uniform are bloody by the time you're done, but the soldier is stabilized and the medics send you on your way with a grateful nod. 3 or 4, your quest for fresh air takes you to the roof of the main factory complex, where several soldiers in rain ponchos are stationed on lookout, scanning the perimeter through scopes. You got a light? One of them asks as you wander close to get a better look at the city in the distance. The cigarette smoke vanishes quickly in the rain that's still coming down. Man, take a look at this shit, the lookout says and hands his binoculars over for you to look through. The city is illuminated in light amplified greens that bloom white with distant explosions. Gunfire pops and streaks across the night sky, and you can just make out dark mechanical shapes stalking between the buildings. 5 or 6, not being a proper military base, FOB Saber doesn't really have a mess hall, but a cafeteria for the factory workers is the next best thing. A mix of soldiers and civilians have set up shop in the kitchens, and as you make your way down there in search of something to eat, you can smell the unfamiliar but appetizing sense of food you've never had before. Even though most of it is frozen and pre-packaged fare, it's still a step up from MREs, and some enterprising cooks have even whipped up a local stew of some sort, or as close an approximation as they can manage given the circumstances. Most importantly, they have plenty of coffee. 7 or 8. Come to check up on her? Don't worry, she'll be good as new. Hell, these mechs of yours practically build themselves. Vonna Mayhew doesn't seem to mind the company in the engineering bay where your mech is being gone over by technicians. The temperature in here is sweltering thanks to the printer running far beyond normal tolerances, and it's hard to say whether it's better or worse than being out in the rain. Vonna's happy to let you pitch in if you prefer giving your mech a personal tune-up, and over the din of machinery she's happy to tell you about Nova Alizia and what it's like when there isn't a war on, including her favorite bar and a restaurant she recommends you try. 9 or 10, wow, you guys are really union, huh? Gotta be honest, I didn't think you actually existed. You know, not anymore. Private Regus is wired on stims, scared from his first taste of real combat, and excited to meet people hailing from a vast galactic polity that local history books suggest had probably dissolved after the fall of Seccom. He's also unsure exactly where he's supposed to be reporting, as he was separated from his unit and made his way to FOB Sabre on his own. He clings to you, peppering you with questions, eager to hear of your own exploits, even though this may be your first mission as well, and he'd be extremely grateful if you could help get him squared away. 11 or 12, it isn't thunder that rolls through the base, causing everyone to freeze before running off to ready stations. It's an explosion. Alarms go out across the complex, the orders going out over local comms fuzzy and distorted from the jamming blanketing the city. But your mech is still being repaired, not yet ready to sortie. Tired and tense, the defenders make ready for hostile contact. That never comes. It seems to take forever for the Recon unit to report back that they've found the blast site, but no sign of the enemy. Was it an errant artillery shell? A missile that went off target? It's impossible to say. The all clear is sounded, the alarm silenced, and everyone warily returns to their duties. 13 or 14, about time you showed up. It's Naya Rhino, another chassis pilot from the Rio Grande. They're in a pretty good mood for someone who's newly missing an arm, though with modern medical technology being what it is, a biological or cybernetic replacement will take care of that easily enough. She wants to hear all about your trek here, and she's got some stories of her own to share. Her dropship managed to circle around the thickest anti-air and touched down safe, but her squad was soon ambushed by sovereignty forces packing some sort of beam weapon, which is what cost her the arm. They must have been spec ops. It was like they were hunting for something. One of them just vanished into thin air when we returned fire, real freaky shit. Watch yourself out there, yeah? 15 or 16, your wanderings have taken you into the factory's administrative wing, which seems to have been put to use as an impromptu civilian shelter. You see clusters of people sitting on the floor or borrowed office chairs, tired and scared. Some are listening to music or reading, some talking quietly, some fruitlessly trying to find a broadcast that isn't drowned in endless static. One of them, a woman named Zoe, approaches as she sees you and asks if you're one of the soldiers from the ship and if you can help her round up some additional supplies for their crew. Page extra blankets, painkillers, and bottled water would be appreciated. You can tell she's exhausted, but she's holding it together. She has to. People are counting on her. 17 or 18, hey Union, Semir. We need an impartial third party for this. A group of LSA soldiers engaged in a heated debate call you over, telling you they need an outside perspective to help resolve an argument about as best you can tell whose partner is the cutest. You're shown an assortment of pictures and videos on slates, regaled with stories and anecdotes, all in an attempt to sway your opinion one way or the other. The in-jokes fly fast and thick along with cultural references you have no context for, though it feels unerringly similar to arguments you witnessed, and maybe even participated in, during your academy days. No consensus is ever reached, and things eventually turn, as they so often do, to arm wrestling. 19 or 20, you aren't sure where the cat came from. Nobody seems to be looking for a lost pet, so maybe it wandered into the base looking to get out of the rain and away from the fighting, but wherever it came from it seems to have taken a liking to you. It meows energetically and trots alongside you as you go, rubbing against you and pawing at your leg for attention whenever you stoop. Page, it's a good conversation starter at the very least. And hey, when's the last time you petted a cat anyway? Whenever an explosion rumbles in the distance, it freezes for a moment and then moves even closer to you for protection, and when you eventually settle in to grab some sleep, it curls up on top of you, purring contentedly.